At an elevation of 5,100 meters, the Nyainchentangla range presents a paradox of abundance and absolute denial. This is the central Tibetan plateau, a tectonic pedestal where the Earth has been thrust into the stratosphere, far above the reach of the monsoons that nourish the world below. Here, the human body suffers a profound hydraulic betrayal. The landscape is dominated by billions of tons of frozen glacial water, massive white rivers of ice that have carved the granite peaks into jagged, indifferent monoliths. Yet, for the inhabitant, this vast reservoir is a mockery. Surrounded by more fresh water than almost anywhere else on the planet, the nomad exists in a state of terminal thirst. The ambient temperature remains so far below the freezing point that the environment becomes a liquid desert. Every drop of life-sustaining moisture is locked in a crystalline prison, and the act of liberating it requires a massive expenditure of thermal energy, a resource more precious than gold in a land without wood. To survive within the hydraulic vacuum of the Nyainchentangla is to manage a deficit of hydration and oxygen that would terminate an unadapted life in mere hours. At this altitude, the atmosphere is so thin and so desiccated that it functions as a physical suction. The air is a sponge, leaching moisture directly from the mucous membranes with every inhalation. The act of breathing, which in the lowlands is a passive biological function, here becomes a slow internal evaporation. The lungs are stripped of their fluid. The skin cracks in deep vertical fissures, and the blood thickens into a viscous sludge. The heart must labor with a violent increased workload to push this heavy fluid through capillaries already constricted by the cold. It is a state of permanent physiological siege, where the success of a civilization is measured not by its monuments or its wealth, but by its ability to generate enough heat to turn a single handful of ice into a liquid. This is a chemical victory that must be won anew every single day, a relentless negotiation between the internal fire of the metabolism and the absolute zero of the mountain. The geography of the Nyainchentangla is a study in vertical desiccation. The range stretches across the heart of Tibet, acting as a massive wall that traps the cold air within high-altitude basins. The soil is a sterile mixture of grey lithic dust and permafrost, offering no foundation for any vegetation that could provide fuel. In this mineral void, the only greenery is a sparse, hardy alpine grass that has learned to thrive on the edge of the absolute. This grass is the primary fuel of the plateau, not because it burns, but because it is consumed by the yak. The yak is the biological intermediary, the machine that converts the frozen grass into the only combustible material available: animal dung. The nomad's existence is entirely dependent on this digestive process. The dung is collected, pressed, and dried in the intense ultraviolet light until it becomes a concentrated brick of carbon. Without this byproduct of the beast, there is no fire. Without fire, there is no liquid water. And without water, there is only the silence of the frost. Routine on the plateau is a grueling choreography of thermal management. The day does not begin with the sun, but with the cold. Long before the first light touches the valley floor, the inhabitant must rise and confront the hydraulic vacuum. The water stored inside the black yak hair tent has frozen solid during the 14-hour night. To drink is a labor of hours. It begins with the hacking of ice from a nearby glacial stream, a task conducted at an altitude where every swing of the pick is a struggle for consciousness. The oxygen levels are so low that the human brain operates in a state of chronic hypoxia, leading to a distortion of time and the perception of effort. Once the ice is harvested, it is carried back to the hearth, where the dung fire is carefully coaxed into life. The melting of the ice is a slow, agonizing transition. The nomad sits by the embers, watching the solid turn to liquid, a process that consumes the very energy they need to keep their own bodies warm. This is the reality of the thermal debt. To hydrate the body, is to cool the home. The diet of the Nyan Kentangler is a strategic response to this hydraulic betrayal. It is centered on caloric density and metabolic heat. The primary substance is marku, a mixture of melted yak butter, salt, and roasted barley flour. This is consumed as a high-lipid slurry, providing the fats necessary to fuel the heart's increased stroke volume and to coat the throat against the drying effect of the air. The salt is a physiological requirement to manage the body's internal pressure in the vacuum, while the butter acts as a thermal lubricant for the organs. In this environment, food is not an aesthetic experience. It is a tactical asset. Every calorie is a defensive barrier against the cold. The consumption of fermented milk solids, which remain functional even in sub-zero temperatures, provides a surge of metabolic energy that helps maintain the blood's fluidity. The nomad eats with a stoic, focused intensity, knowing that their internal temperature is a finite resource that is being constantly extracted by the wind. Architecture on the plateau is a binary of stone and hair, designed to mitigate the desiccation of the vacuum. The Drokpa nomads live in the bar, a tent woven from the coarse guard hairs of the yak. This fabric is a biological membrane, evolving over millennia to protect the animal from the same environment the human now inhabit. The yak hair is naturally oily, repelling the moisture of the mist while trapping a layer of air within its weave. During the day, the bar remains slightly porous, allowing the smoke from the dung fire to escape. At night, as the temperature collapses and the moisture in the breath turns to ice on the surface of the fabric, the protein fibers swell and stiffen. The tent becomes an airtight, frozen shell, a microclimate of survival that contains the warmth of the hearth and the breath of the family. This is a home that adjusts its own permeability in response to the lethality of the atmosphere, a masterpiece of nomadic engineering that has allowed the species to occupy the stratosphere for thousands of years. The spiritual life of the Nyan Kentangler is an extension of this physical struggle. The mountains are not viewed as scenery, but as sentient deities, the La, who control the state of the water and the thickness of the air. The glaciers are believed to be the white palaces of these mercurial gods, and the turquoise lakes, such as Namso, are their eyes. To survive is to remain in a state of constant, humble negotiation with these entities. Every morning, the nomad burns sang, a ritual incense of high-altitude juniper, creating a thick, fragrant smoke that is believed to thicken the air and pacify the spirits. This smoke is a spiritual surrogate for the missing oxygen, a way to saturate the void with human intention. The faith of the plateau is not a retreat from the struggle. It is the very mechanism that makes the struggle meaningful, transforming the brutal environment into a site of karmic purification and ancestral endurance. The silence of the central plateau is a pressurized, heavy stillness that weighs upon the mind. It is the sound of an environment that has been stripped of every superfluity. There is no rustle of leaves, no hum of insects, only the low, rhythmic rasp of breathing and the occasional crackle of the dung fire. This silence forces an intensification of the internal life. The nomad does not waste words, for the oxygen cost of speech is too high. Communication is a language of gestures, a shared stoicism born of 20 generations of inhabiting the same vacuum. In the long nights, when the shadow of the peaks falls across the tents, and the temperature collapses by 30 degrees in minutes, the interior of the bar becomes a site of oral preservation. Stories of the first herders and the pacts they made with the mountain spirits are passed down to the children, ensuring that the cultural DNA of the community remains as resilient as their genetic code. The biological reality of the Nyan Kentangler inhabitant is a critique of the modern obsession with ease. They possess a unique genetic mutation, inherited from the Denisovans, which allows their blood to remain thin and functional even in the absence of oxygen. They do not merely survive the altitude, they thrive within it, moving across the saline plains and frozen rivers with a grace that mocks the suffocating agony of the lowlander. This physiological triumph is a reminder that the limits of life are subjective boundaries that dissolve in the face of absolute necessity. The nomad is a creature of fat, salt, and hair, an oxygen thief who has learned to inhabit a tectonic pedestal where the air is a luxury and the water is a solid. Their existence proves that the human spirit does not require the support of a global supply chain to maintain its dignity, only a collective purpose and the strength to endure. The lesson of the high Himalayas is the purity of the single purpose. In a world where every breath is a hard-won victory and every ray of sun is a radiation threat, there is no space for the trivialities of the lowlands. The people of the hydraulic vacuum remind a distracted humanity that the most profound sense of belonging is found not in comfort, but in the total integration with a landscape that demands everything. They do not seek to change their surroundings. They have instead achieved the far more difficult task of changing themselves to fit the rock and the ice. Their lives are a slow, rhythmic labor of presence, a testament to the fact that progress is a luxury of the temperate zones. On the roof of the world, victory is not the expansion of territory, but the simple, quiet fact of continued existence at the edge of the absolute zero. As the sun sets over the Nyang Kentangla, the radiation withdraws and the thermal collapse begins. The indigo sky turns to a terrifying black, and the stars appear with a clarity that is unknown in the humid valleys below. The glaciers groan as they shift under their own weight, a low-frequency thunder that vibrates through the permafrost. The nomad retreats into the bar, seals the door, and feeds the final brick of dung into the hearth. The hydraulic betrayal remains a constant, the terminal thirst a lingering presence, but the internal fire is maintained. Tomorrow, the ice will be hacked once more, the slurry will be mixed, and the chemical victory will be won again. The vacuum persists, but so does the life within it, a small, stubborn flame burning brightest where the air is thinnest, a living prayer written in the dust and the ice of the central plateau. In the final assessment, the thirst of the frozen is not just a physical condition, but a sculptor of character. It has carved the Drokpa into a people of profound stoicism and resilience, stripping away the unnecessary until only the core of humanity remains. They are the sovereigns of the high desert, the heat thieves and the light masters who have turned a tectonic depression into a site of spiritual triumph. As the light of the stars illuminates the white rivers of the glaciers, the silence of the plateau confirms its status as a realm apart. It is a place of absolute clarity and absolute cold, a sanctuary for the hardy and the graveyard for the unprepared. The Nyang Kentangla remains, a tectonic pedestal untouched by time, and the nomads remain with it, the silent masters of a life stripped to its absolute essence. There is no waste, no hurry, and no trash heap. There is only the breath, the beast, and the ice. The grey lithic dust rises once more in a sudden cold gust, coating the black tents in a layer of mineral ash. This is the essence of the central plateau, a place where the landscape is an actor and the human is a witness. The hydraulic vacuum continues its work, siphoning the moisture from the world and the warmth from the blood. But the heart of the nomad beats on, synchronized with the pulse of the moving ice and the rhythms of the yak. The internal fire is maintained, fueled by the lipid fortification of the ancestors and the unshakable conviction that life has a purpose, even at the edge of the world. The light fades, the shadow claims the earth, and the silence returns, a pressurized, holy quiet that marks the end of another day on the roof of the world, where the thirst is eternal and the victory is in the persistence. This is the reflection in the frozen eye of the glacier.
that we are only as strong as the conditions we can endure.
The modern cot of comfort is a fragile shield that will eventually shatter against the reality of the planet. When that time comes, the knowledge of the nomads, the surgical economy of the hearth, the metabolic strategy of the lipids, and the stoic clarity of the mind will be the only currency that matters. They are the survivors of the future, living in the past, a people whose existence is a bridge between the primordial origin and the ultimate limit of the species. On the high frontier of Tibet, the fire is still lit, the incense still rises, and the human spirit still burns. A small, defiant signal from the roof of the world, reminding us all that true freedom is found in the strength to inhabit the void. The Nyaen-Kentangla Range stands as the skeletal tectonic spine of the central Tibetan plateau, a monolithic barrier of granite and ice that dictates the very boundaries of human possibility. This is a mountain range of profound geographical consequence, serving as the absolute divider between the nomadic wilderness of the northern Changtang and the fragmented agricultural valleys of the south. It is the result of 50 million years of crustal violence, a remnant of the collision between the Indian and Eurasian plates that thrust the Earth into the stratosphere, far beyond the reach of the temperate world. At an average elevation of 5,000 meters, with peaks exceeding 7,000, the range operates as a site of cryogenic isolation. This is a geography defined by its pure verticality, a realm where the Earth has physically exited the biological safety zone of the planet, entering a stratospheric vacuum where the laws of survival are dictated by the physics of radiation and the chemistry of desiccation. The isolation of the Nyaen-Kentangla is not merely a matter of distance, but a fundamental condition of the atmosphere. The range creates its own permanent microclimate, a closed system of sub-zero temperatures and high-velocity winds that funnel through the jagged gaps in the rock. Here, the air is too thin to hold the warmth of the sun, and too dry to permit the formation of clouds that might provide a thermal blanket. The result is an environment of perpetual extraction, where the landscape is constantly siphoning heat and moisture from anything biological. To cross this range is to enter a laboratory of the absolute, where the Earth is reduced to its most primordial components: stone, ice, and light. The mountains do not merely surround the traveler. They define the limits of the human frame, acting as a pressurized cage of light and frost that rejects the soft, humid habits of the lowlands. Historically, the Nyaen-Kentangla existed in a state of absolute geographical lockdown. Access to the high-altitude basins was governed by the seasonal collapse and formation of ice bridges, natural arches of frozen glacial runoff that provided the only precarious links between the isolated valleys. For centuries, these bridges were the arbiters of contact, opening briefly during the coldest months when the ice was thick enough to support the weight of a yak, and vanishing during the brief, violent thaws of the summer. This cycle created a temporal isolation that lasted for millennia, ensuring that the communities within the range remained biologically and culturally distinct. The people of the Nyaen-Kentangla lived within a loop of time that was measured not by decades, but by the slow, grinding advance and retreat of the glaciers. They were marooned on a tectonic pedestal, preserved in the state of cryogenic stillness that prevented the encroachment of the outside world. The climate of the range is a relentless paradox of radiation and cold. Because the atmosphere is stripped of its protective density, the ultraviolet intensity reaches levels that are physically mutagenic. The sun does not provide warmth in the traditional sense. It provides a high-frequency bombardment. This creates a landscape of perpetual contradiction, where the solar radiation is powerful enough to melt the surface of a glacier, turning solid ice into a steaming slurry of meltwater, while the ambient air temperature remains locked at -20 degrees Celsius. This is the radiation sieve, an atmospheric condition where the heat of the sun is never trapped, but instead passes through the thin air without warming it, striking the rock and the ice with a raw, surgical precision. A person standing in this light will feel their skin blistering and their eyes being scorched by the glare. even as their bones are gripped by a cold that has not retreated since the last glacial maximum. This thermal duality demands a state of total physiological submission. The human homeostatic system is not designed to accommodate a world where the face is burned by radiation, while the feet are frozen by the permafrost.
The body is under constant agonizing tension, attempting to regulate its internal core against an environment that is simultaneously searing and freezing. The sun blinds the eyes, reflecting off the white fields of lunar silt and the blue ice of the glaciers, creating a visual field of whiteout intensity that can cause permanent retinal damage in minutes. Yet, despite this blinding light, the air remains a desiccated sponge, harvesting moisture from the breath and the skin. The environment does not offer comfort. It offers a choice between the fire of the sun and the iron of the ice. The verticality of the Nyain Quentangler ensures that time itself is experienced differently. At 7,000 meters, the range is a site of tectonic duration, a place where the human presence is a brief, flickering metabolic event in a timeline of mineral permanence. The mountains are still growing, pushed upward by the ongoing collision of continents,
a movement that is felt in the frequent, low-frequency tremors that ripple through the granite foundations. These tremors are the respiratory sounds of the earth, the groans of a landscape that is still in its raw, unfinished state. The glaciers, too, are in motion, slow rivers of solid water that crush the rock into a fine, grey dust, which is then carried by the high-velocity winds to coat the tents and the people. This is a landscape of erosion and deposition, where the wind and the ice work in tandem to strip the world to its barest components. The high-velocity winds of the range are the primary sculptors of the land.
Unhindered by trees or soft soil, the wind gains hurricane force as it funnels through the high-altitude corridors, carrying with it a fine, abrasive grit of sand and ice crystals. This wind does not merely blow, it sandblasts the rock, carving it into ventifacts, geometric, faceted stones that record the dominant direction of the atmosphere's movement. The wind is the voice of the cryogenic isolation, a constant, low-frequency howl that drowns out the sounds of the human presence. In this acoustic vacuum, sound does not carry. The air is too thin to provide the resonance required for speech or song. The silence of the Nyain Quentangler is therefore a physical weight, a pressurized quiet that forces the inhabitant to internalize their own thoughts. The absence of a biological safety zone means that there is no margin for error in the navigation of this geography. To exit the sheltered hollows of the camp is to step into a world that is fundamentally indifferent to human survival. The permafrost is a permanent feature of the ground, a layer of ice-locked earth that never thaws, ensuring that the world beneath the feet remains as solid and cold as the rock. This frozen foundation prevents the growth of any vegetation larger than a sparse, ground-hugging lichen. There are no forests here to provide shelter, no wood to burn for warmth. The landscape is a monochrome expanse of grey granite, white ice, and the deep, bruised indigo of the high-altitude sky. This indigo is the colour of the vacuum, a signal that the protective atmosphere of the Earth has been left behind. The history of the Nyain Quentangler is written in the ice. The glaciers are the archives of the plateau, trapping the dust and the air of past millennia within their crystalline structure. The nomads who inhabit the edges of these glaciers are the guardians of this ancient memory, their own lineage a testament to the ability of the species to endure the absolute. They have lived through the collapse of ice bridges and the shifting of tectonic plates, their survival predicated on a profound humility before the mountain. They do not seek to dominate the verticality, but to navigate it with a calculated stoicism. They are the inhabitants of the stratospheric void, a people who have learned to thrive where the air is a luxury and the sun is a blade. The hydraulic vacuum of the central plateau is a direct result of this cryogenic context. Because the air is so cold and so high, it cannot hold water vapor. The humidity levels drop to near zero, creating a world where organic matter does not rot, but instead undergoes a process of sub-zero mummification. Wood, if brought from the lower valleys, soon shrinks and shatters. Leather becomes as brittle as glass. The human body is subjected to this same desiccation, a slow internal evaporation that thickens the blood and cracks the skin. Every action on the plateau is a struggle against this drying force. The inhabitant must perpetually replenish their internal fluids, using water that has been extracted from the ice at a massive thermal cost. This is the central struggle of the Nine Quentangler, a war for moisture in a land of frozen abundance. The tectonic barrier of the range also dictates the social structure of the plateau. The nomadic north is a world of absolute mobility, where the Drokpa move their herds in response to the subtle shifts in the microclimate. The agricultural south is a world of permanent stone villages, anchored to the rare patches of fertile soil in the lower valleys. The Nine Quentangler is the wall that separates these two ways of being, a physical and cultural threshold that few dared to cross until the modern era. To the nomads of the north, the range is the white guardian, a spiritual and geographic anchor that provides a sense of place in the immense, featureless steppe. They view the 7,000-meter peaks as the palaces of the La, the mercurial deities who govern the weather and the ice. This spiritual landscape is a direct reflection of the physical hostility. The faith of the Nine Quentangler is not an abstraction, it is a survival manual. The rituals are designed to pacify the spirits of the wind and the frost, to ensure that the ice bridges remain stable and the ultraviolet radiation does not blind the herd. It is a belief system that internalizes the laws of the plateau, turning the requirements of survival into a sacred duty. The nomad does not see the mountain as a geological formation, but as a sentient authority that must be respected through silence and ritual. This total physiological and spiritual submission is what has allowed the community to remain on the tectonic pedestal for centuries, untouched by the progression of the outside world. The cryogenic isolation is therefore a state of both physical and cultural preservation. In the absence of roads, electricity, and the comforts of the lowlands, the people of the Nine Quentangler have maintained a version of humanity that is stripped of the unnecessary. Their character is a reflection of the granite and the ice, hard, resilient, and enduring. They are the sovereigns of the verticality, a people whose existence is a slow, rhythmic labor of presence at the edge of the world. The range persists as a monolithic testament to the power of the planet, a tectonic spine that thrusts the Earth into the sky and keeps the history of the species frozen in its icy grasp. The sun begins to move toward the horizon, and the shadow of the 7,000-meter peak stretches across the valley floor. The transition is violent. As the light withdraws, the temperature collapse begins, siphoning the remaining heat into the indigo void. The radiation sieve is closed for the night, leaving behind an environment of absolute zero. The permafrost remains solid, the ice bridges remain locked, and the silence returns to its pressurized state. The Nine Quentangler range stands indifferent, a vertical desert of stone and light, while the inhabitants retreat into their yak hair fortresses, huddling around the dung fires to steal enough warmth to survive until the dawn. This is the context of the high plateau, a world where geography has exited the biological safety zone and where every breath is a victory over the vacuum. The grey lithic dust, the sterile silt of the glaciers, and the turquoise eyes of the salt lakes form a landscape that is both a graveyard and a sanctuary. It is a place where the raw power of the tectonic collision is still visible in every fractured rock and every frozen river. To be in the Nine Quentangler is to be at the final frontier of human habitation, where the air is thin, the light is sharp, and the cold is absolute.
The range has claimed this land, and the nomads have claimed the range,
creating a closed loop of existence that continues, unbroken, in the heart of the stratospheric void. Their presence is a quiet defiance of the laws of geography, a tiny, persistent warmth on a tectonic pedestal designed to trap the cold. The final authority in this landscape is the ice. It is the ice that determines the movement of the herds, the timing of the migration, and the possibility of contact. It is the ice that stores the water and the memory of the earth. In the Nyan Quentangler, life is a slow, rhythmic labor of survival against the extraction of the frost. The inhabitant is a witness to the Pleistocene, living in an epoch that has been erased elsewhere. Their existence is a bridge between the primordial origin and the ultimate limit of the species, a testament to the fact that the human spirit can inhabit a world of cryogenic isolation and find a way to remain liquid in a landscape of total desiccation. The range stands, a monolithic spine of granite and ice, and the heart of the nomad beats on, perfectly synchronized with the pulse of the moving mountain. This is the reality of the hydraulic vacuum, a world where the water is a solid and the air is a thief. It is an environment that demands total submission, yet offers a clarity of existence that is impossible in the muffled air of the lowlands. The Nyan Quentangler persists as a sanctuary of the absolute, a place where the history of the earth is still being written in the growth of glaciers and the movement of continents. The nomads move across the tectonic shelf, their lives a living prayer written in the dust and the ice, as they continue their journey through the cryogenic isolation on the roof of the world. The light of the stars illuminates the white peaks, a cold, crystalline mirror reflecting the power of the planet and the endurance of the spirit that dares to inhabit it. The grey silt rises again in the cold, abrasive gust, coating the black tents and the herds in a layer of mineral ash. The vacuum continues its work, but the internal fire is maintained. The Nyan Quentangler range stands, a vertical desert of stone and light, and the Drokpa remain with it, the silent masters of a life stripped to its absolute essence. There is no waste, no hurry, and no trash heap. There is only the breath, the beast, and the ice. Tomorrow, the sun will return with its surgical light. The glaciers will groan, and the chemical victory over the hydraulic vacuum will be won anew. For now, there is only the silence of the tectonic shelf and the steady, quiet breathing of a people who have mastered the stratosphere. The range is a graveyard and a sanctuary, a tectonic pedestal where the earth has risen to meet the sky and found a sanctuary in the heart of the absolute zero. Domestic life in the high, fractured folds of the Nyan Quentangler range is a calculated alchemical process, a relentless conversion of waste into warmth and solid into liquid. At an elevation where the atmosphere offers no hospitality, the interior of the black yak hair tent becomes the primary laboratory of survival. The central half is not a decorative center, it is a metabolic vessel, a vital furnace for transforming the only available fuel into the kinetic energy required to sustain human existence. In a landscape where the forest line was surpassed thousands of vertical meters below, the concept of wood is a distant myth. The community relies entirely on the economics of the ember, a survival strategy governed by the collection and preservation of desiccated yak dung. This substance is the solar energy of the short summer, captured by the alpine grasses, processed through the four-stomach digestive system of the beast, and deposited upon the permafrost as a concentrated brick of fiber. To the nomad, every piece of dung is a unit of survival time, a measurable fraction of an hour that can be spent above the freezing point. The collection of this combustible currency is a quiet, stoic labor. Throughout the brief window of the thaw, the inhabitants move across the grey lithic dust, bending to the earth in a repetitive, liturgical motion to gather the waste. It is then pressed, dried in the intense ultraviolet radiation, and stacked in geometric ramparts around the camp. By winter, these mounds are the only true wealth of the clan. The fire is never allowed to die.
The caloric cost of restarting a hearth from a cold start is a luxury that the community cannot afford. A dead fire means the immediate solidification of the household's water supply and a rapid collapse of the internal microclimate. The hearth must be maintained as a perpetual, smoldering pulse. Even during the deepest hours of the night, an elder will wake to feed a single, measured brick into the embers, ensuring the continuity of the heat.
This is a life measured in the slow, orange glow of burning fiber, where the management of the ash is as precise as the management of the breath. The primary objective of the fire is the chemical victory over the hydraulic vacuum. In the Nyayin Chentangla, water is rarely a liquid. It is a geological feature, a crystalline solid that must be hacked from the environment and forced into a fluid state. The act of melting snow or ice for the morning tea is a significant energy transaction.
It requires the consumption of several units of dung fuel to overcome the latent heat of fusion, a process that extracts warmth from the tent to hydrate the body. The nomad sits by the hearth, watching the transition of the ice into steam, a silent witness to the struggle between the fire and the frost. This water is never consumed in its pure state. It is immediately fortified with salt and butter to create a thermal brine. The tea is the medium through which the heat of the ember is transferred directly into the human blood, a visceral replenishment of the biological reserves before the herder steps out into the wind-scoured void. Nutrition in this stratospheric basin is centered on the consumption of kasha, a raw protein source that reflects the absolute desiccation of the environment. In a world where the humidity levels drop to near zero, the laws of organic decay are suspended.
Rot is an impossibility because the air is too dry and cold to sustain the bacteria required for decomposition. The Changpa utilize this hydraulic vacuum as a natural curing chamber. Fresh meat from the autumn cull is hung from the rafters of the tent or placed upon high, wind-swept ridges, where it is subjected to a process of sub-zero mummification. The high-altitude wind strips the moisture from the muscle fibers, concentrating the fats and proteins into a dense, leathery substance that can be stored indefinitely. Kasha is not cooked by heat, but by the atmosphere itself. It is a form of cold cooking, where the radiation and the wind break down the tissues until the meat is cured by the vacuum. The consumption of kasha is a mechanical act of refueling. The nomad does not seek flavor, but the slow-burning energy of the animal's lipids. The meat is sliced into thin, translucent shards, using a blade that has been sharpened by the same grey silt that coats the valley floor. It is eaten raw, providing the dense caloric intake necessary to fuel the heart as it pushes thickened blood through the system. This diet is a strategic adaptation to the lack of fuel. To sear or boil meat would be a wasteful expenditure of the dung reserves. By consuming the meat in its wind-cured state, the nomad preserves the fire for the melting of ice, creating a hierarchy of energy use where the hydration of the body takes precedence over the preparation of the food. Every bite of kasha is a replenishment of the internal furnace, a biological battery that will sustain the metabolism through the grueling choreography of the migration. Routine on the plateau is a sequence of thermal preservation, a lifestyle designed to minimize the loss of heat at every possible juncture. The transition from day to night is not a sunset, but a thermal collapse. The moment the shadow of the 7,000-meter peaks falls across the tents, the ambient temperature drops with a velocity that the human homeostatic system cannot match. The response is a collective withdrawal. As the darkness settles, the act of sleep is transformed into a communal survival tactic. Families do not sleep in individual beds, they huddle together in a single concentrated mass of metabolic heat. Beneath heavy layers of yak hair felt and sheepskin robes, the bodies of the elders, the children, and the parents are merged into a biological battery. This communal huddle ensures that the core temperature of each individual is maintained by the shared warmth of the group.
The interior of the bar tent becomes a sanctuary of shared respiration. The coarse yak hair fabric, frozen into an airtight seal by the moisture of the breath, traps the communal heat within a small, pressurized volume. In this darkness, the only sound is the rhythmic, heavy breathing of the family, a sound that is both a biological function and a collective reassurance. The cold outside may be -40 degrees, but within the huddle, a fragile microclimate of 20 degrees is maintained. This is a life where the boundary between the individual and the clan is physically dissolved by the requirements of the frost. The night is not a time of rest, but a time of passive resistance against the atmospheric extraction. To sleep alone in the Nyainken Tangla is to risk a core collapse. To sleep together is to endure until the dawn.
The yak, tethered just outside the tent or sometimes brought into the entryway, serves as an additional thermal buffer. The animal's massive body, radiating heat through its dense coat, creates a secondary layer of protection for the human dwelling. The relationship is one of total integration. The yak provides the milk for the butter tea, the dung for the fire, the wool for the tent, and finally, the heat for the night. In return, the nomad provides the movement required to find the sparse patches of grass beneath the snow.
It is a closed loop of energy exchange where the distinction between human, animal, and landscape is blurred by the shared necessity of survival. The economics of the ember extend even to the livestock. The herder must ensure that the animals have enough caloric reserve to survive the night, for a dead yak is a loss of fuel, fabric, and thermal shielding. Time in this domestic sphere is measured by the duration of the flame and the thickness of the ice. There is no haste in the Nyainken Tangla, for haste leads to sweat, and sweat is a lethal liability. In the sub-zero air, moisture on the skin will freeze the moment the heart rate slows, leading to a rapid siphoning of heat. The inhabitants move with a deliberate, slow-motion grace, a physical language of conservation. Every movement, the stirring of the tea, the slicing of the meat, the folding of the felt, is performed with a stoic economy.
This is a culture that has mastered the art of the long wait, the ability to remain still and focused while the environment rages outside. The silence within the tent is not a void, but a texture, a pressurized quiet that reflects the total concentration required to maintain the internal fire. The prostration and the prayer wheel continue their motion even in the dim light of the dung fire. Spiritual life is not a separate activity, but a part of the alchemical process. The recitation of mantras is believed to generate an internal heat, a tumo of the spirit, that fortifies the body against the cryogenic isolation. As the nomad moves the beads of a yak bone rosary, they are not just counting prayers. They are maintaining a rhythmic focus that prevents the mind from succumbing to the lethargy of the cold. The spiritual core of the Nyainken Tangla is a furnace of intent, a way to justify the grueling routine of the hydraulic vacuum.
They do not view their life as a struggle against a mountain, but as a ritualized participation in the mountain's own duration. As the 14-hour night draws to its close, the economy of the ember reaches its most critical point. The dung pile is at its lowest, and the communal huddle is at its coldest. The air inside the tent is thick with the scent of fermented butter, woodless smoke, and the heavy musk of the sheepskins. This is the moment of the greatest vulnerability, where the thermal debt is at its peak.
The inhabitants wait in the silence, their bodies anchored to one another, listening for the first sound of the wind shifting, a signal that the sun is approaching the eastern ridges. The first light will hit the peaks, then move down the granite walls to the valley floor, initiating the sun path and the beginning of another day's alchemy. The economics of the ember govern the transition into the morning. The fire is coaxed into a brighter flame, the ice is placed in the kettle, and the first slurry of khasha and tsampa is prepared. The cycle begins again. The extraction of water from the solid,
the fortification of the blood with lipids, and the preparation for the migration. There is no waste in this routine, for waste is a sin against survival. The Drokpa nomads move through the cryogenic isolation with a clarity of purpose that the modern world has forgotten. They are the sovereigns of the high folds, the people who have turned the lack of wood into a mastery of the ember.
Their life is an unadorned flame, burning with a stoic intensity in a world of moving ice and vertical desiccation. The lesson of the Nyaeng Quentangla domesticity is the value of the essential. In the lowlands, energy is an invisible and infinite resource. Here, it is tangible, finite, and sacred. Every brick of dung represents a summer day's labor. Every shard of kasha represents an animal's life. Every bowl of tea represents a victory over the vacuum. This reality creates a culture of profound gratitude and extreme resilience. The inhabitants do not seek to change their world. They seek only to remain within it, to maintain the internal fire against the atmospheric suction. They are the heat thieves of the Central Plateau, survivors of a hydraulic betrayal who have found a way to remain liquid in a landscape of total frost. The grey lithic dust settles on the stacked dung ramparts, and the wind whistles through the frozen yak hair of the bar. Outside, the glaciers groan into darkness, a reminder of the tectonic power that raised this range 5 kilometers into the air. But inside, the ember glows, the communal huddle remains unbroken, and the heart of the nomad beats on. The Nyaeng Quentangla remains a sanctuary of the absolute, a place where the history of the earth is written in the ice, and the history of the species is written in the ash of the hearth. Tomorrow, the sun will return with its surgical light, the glaciers will glow, and the alchemical process of the plateau will continue. A living prayer of fire and bone in the heart of the stratospheric void. The desiccation of the Rupshu and the Nyaeng Quentangla creates a world of mineral permanence. Without rot, the artifacts of nomadic life, the leather straps, the bone tools, the felt rugs, can last for generations, becoming heirlooms of endurance. This material continuity provides a sense of temporal stability in a landscape that offers no geographical permanence. The nomad is surrounded by the tools of their ancestors, objects that have been tested by the same cold and the same radiation for centuries. This is the true wealth of the plateau, a lineage of survival that is tangible and unbroken. The economics of the ember is not just about the fire of today, but about the fire of 20 generations, a continuous flame that has never been allowed to die in the heart of the moving ice.
As the shadow of the mountain finally retreats and the first surgical light touches the black tent, the inhabitant rises. The huddle dissolves, and the individual returns to the labor of the day. The ice is hacked, the sang is lit, and the kasha is sliced. The transition from the subterranean silence of the sleep to the rhythmic motion of the migration is seamless. They are the people of the oxygen-thin air, the masters of the hydraulic vacuum, and the dwellers of the stratospheric shelf. The mountain stands indifferent, the glaciers advance in their slow-motion crush, and the nomads move within the folds of the range, a small, stubborn warmth on the roof of the world, stealing enough life from the void to persist until the stars return once more. Final victory is the persistence of the flame. In the silence of the Nyaeng Quentangla, where every breath is a conscious effort and every calorie is a strategic asset, the Drokpa nomads remain. They are the architects of an existence that physics has deemed impossible.
A community that has found its sanctuary in the heart of the absolute zero. Their life is a testament to the fact that the human spirit does not require the support of a global supply chain to maintain its dignity. Only a collective purpose and the strength to endure. The grey silt rises, the wind shreds the flags, and the heart of the nomad beats on, perfectly synchronized with the pulse of the tectonic spine. This is the reflection in the frozen eye of the glacier. that life burns brightest where the air is thinnest, and the fire is most sacred when the fuel is most scarce. The spiritual identity of the Nyang Quintangla is anchored in a landscape where the physical and the metaphysical have physically merged. At 5,000 meters, the thinning of the atmosphere does more than extract oxygen from the lungs. It strips away the veil between the material world and the primordial forces that govern it. To the nomads of the central plateau, the mountains are never viewed as inert geology. They are the physical residences of the Tsen, mercurial, red-colored deities who are believed to be the true owners of the ice and the life force of the plateau. This is not a religion of choice, but a defensive negotiation with the invisible. The Drokpa perceive their presence in the high folds of the range as a temporary and conditional loan.
Life is a debt owed to the Ten, and the currency of repayment is respect, ritual, and a total submission to the divine order of the heights. The spiritual world is not an abstraction in this vacuum. It is the primary reality, more durable than the flesh and more constant than the weather. The Ten are perceived as fierce, warrior-like entities, often visualized in a deep, blood-red hue that mirrors the raw, ultraviolet light of the high sun. They command the avalanches that shatter the granite cliffs and the blizzards that can bury a camp in a single afternoon. In the Drokpa worldview, there is no such thing as a natural disaster. There is only spiritual displeasure. To inhabit the range is to live in the constant gaze of these volatile owners. This belief system creates a specific kind of environmental ethics rooted in existential caution. A nomad does not enter a high valley or drink from a glacial spring without first acknowledging the local Ten. This is a spirituality of boundaries, where every action is a calculated effort to maintain the balance between the human trespasser and the divine landlord. The mountains are the masters, and the human presence is a fragile metabolic anomaly, permitted only through the continuous performance of sacred duty. The central technology of this negotiation is the ritual of Sang Sol, the burning of juniper branches in stone altars. This act is stripped of all symbolic pretense. To the Drokpa, it is a literal offering of scent and smoke intended to pacify the spirits who command the elements. The juniper, a hardy and stunted shrub that survives in the lower crevices of the range, is saturated with resin, a concentrated essence of the plateau's limited solar energy. When it is ignited, it produces a thick, aromatic and grey smoke that possesses a visceral density in the thin air. This smoke is a spiritual surrogate for the missing humidity, a way to thicken the atmosphere with human intent. As the scent of the resin fills the valley, it is believed to create a fragrant bridge between the camp and the peaks. The Sang Sol is an olfactory pacification of the void, a way to signal to the Tsen that the community remains humble and observant of the pacts made by the ancestors. The ritual of the smoke is performed with a mechanical precision that matches the labor of herding. Every morning, as the first light touches the white crests of the Nyang Quintangla, the head of the household emerges from the black tent to light the juniper. This is the first metabolic transaction of the day. Before the fire is lit for the tea, the fire is lit for the gods. The smoke rises into the indigo sky, a grey plume that marks the camp as a site of ritual order in a landscape of mineral chaos. The smell of the juniper is the scent of nomadic survival. It is the olfactory marker of a controlled environment. Without the Sang Sol, the air is perceived as empty and hostile, a spiritual vacuum that invites the ghosts of the frost to enter the camp. The smoke provides a psychological and spiritual shielding, an invisible membrane that fortifies the community against the extraction of the cold. Resilience on the central plateau is maintained through the concept of karmic endurance. In a world that offers no physical comfort, the Drokpa have transformed their suffering into a mechanism of spiritual refinement. The hardships of the high plateau, the chronic thirst, the thin air, and the terminal cold are not viewed as misfortunes to be avoided,
but as necessary purifications of the soul. This is a catabolism of the ego, where the brutal environment acts as a crucible, burning away the impurities of attachment and pride. The nomad does not seek an easier life, for they believe that ease is a form of spiritual atrophy. In their worldview, the more difficult the landscape, the more intense the purification. This philosophy turns the struggle for survival into a site of karmic merit, transforming the grueling labor of nomadic life into a form of high-altitude liturgy.
To endure the Nyiin Kentangler is to participate in a slow-motion pilgrimage that lasts a lifetime. The vacuum of physical comfort forces an intensification of the internal life.
In the cities of the lowlands, the mind is distracted by a clutter of sensory inputs and artificial desires. In the central plateau, the scarcity of the external world compels the spirit to turn inward. This is a state of high-altitude meditation, where the boundary between thought and reality becomes porous. The silence of the range is a pressurized quiet that serves as a mirror for the soul. It is a quiet that is not the absence of noise, but a heavy, ontological presence that weighs upon the mind. To survive this silence, the Drokpa utilized the mantra as a psychological rhythmic stabilizer. The constant repetition of sacred syllables, most commonly Om Mani Padme Hum, functions as a mechanical heartbeat for the spirit.
In the absence of external stimuli, the vibration of the mantra provides a center that prevents the mind from fracturing under the pressure of the void. The mantra is a spiritual tool of precision. It is recited with every breath, its rhythm synchronized with the movement of the prayer beads and the rotation of the prayer wheel. In the long hours of herding or the 14-hour nights inside the tent, the mantra provides a constant, low-frequency resonance that keeps the spirit anchored to the divine. This is a kinetic faith, where the repetition of sound creates a spiritual momentum that balances the entropic extraction of the environment. The Drokpa believe that the air of the plateau is a medium that can be saturated with prayer. By releasing the mantras into the wind, they are creating a protective barrier, a spiritual infrastructure that is more durable than any stone wall. The mantra is the breath rendered sacred, a way to turn the very act of survival into a generation of merit. In this context, the monastery is not merely a physical building, but a mental state of detachment. While stone fortresses like the Retting Monastery exist on the lower shelves of the range, they are often days or weeks away from the mobile nomadic camps. The true monastery for the Drokpa is the internal architecture of the spirit. They carry the lineage and the laws of the Dharma within their memory, transforming the black yak hair tent into a site of ritual practice. The religious life is not a retreat from the struggle of the plateau. It is the very mechanism that makes the struggle meaningful. The nomad perceives their life as a series of lessons in impermanence. The shifting of the glaciers, the death of a herd, and the collapse of an ice bridge are all viewed as manifestations of the same truth, that nothing in the material world is permanent. This detachment is the source of their resilience, allowing them to face the precariousness of their existence with a stoic and unwavering courage. The concept of soul loss is a visceral spiritual fear on the plateau, representing the ultimate failure of the internal shield. It is believed that a sudden shock, a violation of a taboo, or the anger of a tsen can cause the life force to depart from the body. This is a spiritual state of hypothermia, where the individual becomes listless, disconnected, and vulnerable to the cold. To prevent soul loss, the Drokpa maintain a complex system of amulets, rituals, and protective mantras. They wear gaos, small silver boxes containing sacred relics and printed prayers, around their necks as a physical armor for the spirit. These objects are the tangible records of their faith, heirlooms of endurance that have been passed down through 20 generations. The gao is the final defense against the void, a tiny, sacred anchor that keeps the individual tethered to the community and the divine, even in the deepest isolation.
The relationship between the Drokpa and the ancestors is a living continuity. They believe that the spirits of the forefathers remain on the plateau, guiding the migration and guarding the high passes. This ancestral presence provides a sense of temporal stability in a landscape that offers no geographical permanence. The nomad is never alone. They are the contemporary link in a chain of survival that stretches back to the Pleistocene. This lineage is maintained through the oral tradition, where stories of ancestral triumphs over the frost and the wind are recounted around the dung fire. These narratives are the spiritual survival manuals of the species, providing the psychological framework required to endure the hydraulic vacuum. To the Drokpa, history is not a record of the past, but a living resonance that informs every step of the migration. The red spirits of the peaks command a total submission that manifests as a profound humility.
This humility is visible in the ritual of the ovo, the stone cairn at the top of a pass. When a nomad adds a stone to the pile, they are not marking their achievement. They are performing a spiritual tax, a payment for the permission to cross the threshold. The ovo is a site of mineral and spiritual accretion, a monument built from the shared submission of thousands of travelers. The wind that whistles through the stones is believed to carry the voices of the La, a subsonic reminder of the scale of the divine. In this moment, the nomad is reduced to a single metabolic point in an immense, unblinking landscape. This reduction is not a source of despair, but a source of clarity. By accepting their smallness, the Drokpa find a state of peace that is unknown to those who seek to dominate the world. Spirituality in the Nyan Quintangla is therefore a form of high-altitude stoichiometry, a balancing of the physical extraction with a spiritual intake.
They consume the lipids of the yak to fuel the body, and they consume the mantras of the Dharma to fuel the spirit. Both are necessary to maintain the internal fire. The synthesis of Vajrayana Buddhism and Bon animism provides a complete psychological map for the habitation of the void. It accounts for the violence of the radiation, the lethality of the cold, and the silence of the vacuum. It turns the plateau from a hostile wasteland into a sacred geography, a place where the human spirit can reach its highest intensification. The Drokpa remain on the roof of the world not because they are trapped by geography, but because they have found a state of being that is perfectly synchronized with the Absolute. As the 14-hour night settles over the range and the temperature collapse begins, the spiritual core of the camp is at its most concentrated. Inside the bar tent, the light of the butter lamp flickers against the copper altars and the weathered faces of the elders. The sound of the wind rattling the frozen fabric is a reminder of the power of the Zen. But inside, the mantra continues its rhythmic vibration, and the scent of the morning juniper still lingers in the felt. The community huddles together, a collective of metabolic and spiritual heat, secure in their relationship with the divine owners of the ice. They do not fear the dark, for they are the guardians of the internal flame. Tomorrow, the Sang Sol will be lit once more. The smoke will rise to the indigo sky, and the negotiation with the Absolute will continue. The liturgy of survival is the only history that matters on the Central Plateau. It is a history written in the repetition of rituals and the endurance of the soul. The grey silt, the white ice, and the red spirits form the trinity of the Nyan Chentangla existence. The Drokpa move through this trinity with a grace that is both biological and divine, a people who have learned to turn the scarcity of the external world into the abundance of the internal. Their existence is a slow, rhythmic labor of faith, a testament to the fact that the human spirit does not require comfort to maintain its dignity, only a purpose that is as vast as the mountain and as constant as the stars. The final authority of the spirit is the silence of the plateau. It is a silence that demands an answer, and the Drokpa
answer with the mantra.
This dialogue between the human breath and the divine vacuum is the fundamental frequency of the Nyayin Kwentangla. It is the sound of a civilization that has transcended the need for the trivial, finding its sanctuary in the heart of the absolute. The heart beats on, the prayer wheel turns, and the internal fire burns with a clarity that is only possible where the air is thinnest. They are the survivors of the karmic endurance, the people who have stayed behind to maintain the balance on the roof of the world, stealing enough purpose from the void to persist until the sun clears the peaks once more. The existence of the nomadic Tibetan within the vertical desiccation of the Nyayin Kwentangla serves as a visceral and final proof that the human spirit is not a product of material abundance, but of relentless environmental friction.
In the contemporary lowlands, the narrative of human success is inextricably linked to the mitigation of struggle. Yet on the high plateau, struggle is the very medium of consciousness. The soul does not expand in the soft cradle of comfort. It expands only when the body is compressed by the absolute limits of the possible. To observe the Drokpa herder standing against a hurricane-force wind at 5,000 meters is to witness a humanity that has been faceted by the elements until it possesses the clarity and hardness of the granite beneath its feet. They live in a state of permanent essentialism, a condition where the total removal of the unnecessary has left behind a version of the species that is raw, durable, and profoundly awake. Every movement, every breath, and every ritual is a tactical necessity, leaving no room for the trivialities or the existential drifts of a pampered world. This is the ultimate biological distillation, a life where the distance between a man and his death is measured only by the glow of a dung ember and the lipid density of a bowl of tea. The modern world is obsessed with the concept of total security, a low-altitude illusion born from the temporary stability of the temperate zones. In the cities of the valley floor, the environment is a managed backdrop, and the source of survival is hidden behind the abstraction of the global supply chain. This total insulation has created a state of spiritual and biological atrophy, a regression of the very resilience that allowed the ancestors to occupy the stratosphere. The survivors of the high range offer a silent and devastating critique of this pursuit. They remind a distracted world that true life is found not in the expansion of safety, but at the intersection of absolute scarcity and absolute faith. In a landscape where every breath is a hard-won victory and every fire is a mechanical miracle, the concept of safety is revealed as a fragile vanity. The nomad does not seek to be safe from the mountain, they seek to be worthy of it. They understand that the only thing that truly belongs to a man is his ability to endure the conditions of the earth without being unmade by them. This essentialism creates a psychology of profound presence. In the lowlands, the mind is a fragmented entity, scattered across 1,000 digital signals and artificial desires. In the hydraulic vacuum of the central plateau, the mind is tethered to the pulse. The scarcity of oxygen and the intensity of the radiation force an intensification of the internal life, turning the act of herding into a high-altitude meditation. There is no space for neurosis in the shadow of a 7,000-meter peak. There is only the requirement of the next step. This focus is a lost human inheritance, a byproduct of total integration with the landscape. The Drokpa do not perceive themselves as separate from the stone or the ice. They are the biological expression of the tectonic pedestal, moving in a cyclical permanence that ignores the frantic linear history of human industry. Their existence is a slow-motion choreography of survival that has remained unchanged for 20 generations, a temporal anchor in a world that has lost its sense of duration. The lesson of the Thirsting Summit is that progress, as defined by the lowlands, is a luxury that results in the dilution of the spirit. For the inhabitant of the Nyayin Kwentangla, victory is not found in the accumulation of technology, but in the simple fact of continued presence. To remain liquid in a landscape of total frost, to remain hydrated in a hydraulic vacuum, and to remain hopeful in a pressurized silence, is the highest form of human achievement. They are the sentinels of a reality that the rest of the world has forgotten, living witnesses to the power of the primordial self. Their skin, fissured by the desiccation and darkened by the solar scythe, is a map of their integrity. They have not been left behind by time. They have instead chosen to inhabit a realm where time is governed by the growth of glaciers and the movement of the stars. This is the sovereignty of the nomad, the pride of a people who know exactly what it costs to stay alive, and are willing to pay that price every single day. The silence of the high plateau is the mirror in which the true value of life is reflected. In the absence of external noise, the internal fire must burn brighter to provide a center. This stillness is not empty. It is a pressurized quiet that demands an answer from the human heart. The Drokpa answer with the mantra and the labor of the migration. They have turned the absolute limit of the species into a site of karmic purification, finding a sanctuary in the very place that geography has rejected.
Their existence is a proof that human dignity does not require the support of a sprawling industrial complex, but only a collective purpose and the strength to endure. As the modern world faces the potential collapse of its artificial systems of control, the knowledge of the nomads, the surgical economy of the hearth, the metabolic strategy of the lipids, and the stoic clarity of the mind becomes the only currency that matters. They are the survivors of the future, living in the past. The relationship between the nomad and the beast is the final integration of life on the plateau. The yak is the biological engine that makes the essentialism possible, a mobile source of heat, fabric, and fuel that converts the sterile dust into human duration. In this synergy, the distinction between man and nature is dissolved. The nomad does not dominate the herd. They serve the requirements of the herd, for they know that their own survival is inextricably linked to the warmth of the animal. This humility is the source of their power. It is a recognition of the interconnectedness of all metabolic activity in a world of scarcity. The Drokpa do not seek to change the mountain. They have instead achieved the far more difficult task of changing themselves to fit the rock. This is the highest state of human development, the total synchronization of the species with the absolute requirements of the environment. As the sun sets over the Nyayan Kentangler and the thermal debt begins its nightly extraction, the reality of the plateau remains unchanged. The silt is still sterile, the air is still thin, and the water is still a solid. But the nomad remains as well, a small, stubborn warmth in the heart of the Himalaya. They retreat into the black yak hair tent, huddle together for metabolic stability, and wait for the dawn. They are not afraid of the dark or the cold, for they have internalized the laws of the frost. They are the heat thieves and the oxygen masters, the people who have found their freedom in the shadows and their sanctuary in the void. Their lives are an unadorned flame, burning with a stoic intensity that illuminates the entire cosmos. They remind us that the flame is most sacred when the fuel is most scarce, and the breath is most holy when it is most earned. The final authority in the Nyayan Kentangler is the silence that follows the hurricane wind. It is a quiet that marks the end of all triviality and the beginning of absolute honesty. In this silence, the inhabitant of the high range stands as a sentinel, guarding the memory of what it means to be truly human. They represent the irreducible core of the species, the part of humanity that refuses to be softened by ease or broken by isolation. They are the keepers of the honest life, stealing enough purpose from the void to persist at the edge of the world. The grey silt rises, the wind shreds the flags, and the heart of the nomad beats on, unbowed and unbroken, in the heart of the moving ice. This is the victory of the high plateau, the simple, rhythmic persistence of the spirit in the center of the absolute zero. The lesson of the thirsting summit is a call to a radical reassessment of our own lives. It asks us what would remain if our infrastructure was stripped away and our comforts were removed.
Would we possess the internal fire to survive the 14-hour night? Would we have the spiritual scaffolding to find meaning in the vacuum? The Changpa and the Drokpa provide the answer through the simple fact of their continued presence. They prove that life persists not through the accumulation of things, but through the intensification of the self. They are the sovereigns of the tectonic shelf, the inhabitants of the stratospheric void, and the masters of the cryogenic isolation. Their existence is a slow, rhythmic labor of faith, a living prayer written in the dust and the ice of the roof of the world.
As the last embers of the dung fire fade and the stars appear with a clarity that is terrifying, the silence of the plateau confirms its status as a realm apart. It is a place of absolute clarity and absolute cold, a sanctuary for the hardy and a graveyard for the unprepared. The Nyankentangla remains, a tectonic spine untouched by time, and the nomads remain with it, the silent masters of a life stripped to its absolute essence. There is no waste, no hurry, and no trash heap. There is only the breath, the beast, and the ice. Tomorrow the sun will return with its surgical light. The glaciers will groan, and the chemical victory over the hydraulic vacuum will be won anew. For now, there is only the silence of the tectonic shelf and the steady, quiet breathing of a people who have mastered the stratosphere. The range is a graveyard and a sanctuary, a tectonic pedestal where the earth has risen to meet the sky and found a sanctuary in the heart of the absolute zero. The liturgy of survival continues, unbroken by the progression of the centuries. The grey dust, the turquoise water, and the black yak hair tents form a landscape that is both a graveyard and a sanctuary. The Drokpa move through this world with a grace that is born of total surrender to the divine order of the mountain. They are the keepers of the high desert, the people who have turned the absolute limit of the species into a site of karmic purification. Their existence is a testament to the fact that the most durable structures in the world are not made of stone or hair, but of the unshakable conviction that life has a purpose, even at the edge of the absolute zero. The heart beats harder, the blood flows thicker, and the flame of humanity continues to burn, stealing enough heat from the void to endure until the dawn. The solar scythe may swing, the radiation may burn, and the cold may colonize the bone. But the Drokpa remain, unbowed and unbroken in the heart of the central plateau. They are the survivors of the radiation shadow, the people of the Nyankentangla, living in a world where every breath is a conscious effort and every day is a victory against the stars. The light fades, the shadows claim the earth, and the silence returns, a pressurized, holy quiet that marks the end of another day on the roof of the world. Final victory is not the arrival at a destination, but the persistence of the journey. The nomad, walking the line between the fire and the frost, is the architect of this victory. They have turned a saline waste into a site of spiritual and biological triumph, finding a sanctuary in the very heart of the hostility. The Nyankentangla remains, a tectonic shelf of salt and light, a world where the earth has risen to meet the sky and found only a void. The Drokpa remain with it, huddling around their dung fires, secure in their relationship with the salt, the light, and the ancient sea that has become their high-altitude home. The grey dust rises once more in a cold, abrasive gust, coating the salt harvest and the black tents in a layer of mineral dust. This is the essence of the plateau, a place where the landscape is an actor and the human is a witness. The binary torture of the fire and the frost continues, a relentless pressure that carves the character of the people and the shape of the rock. The salt continues its crystalline accumulation on the edges of the lakes, a slow white clock ticking in the silence of the high desert. The heart of the nomad beats on, a small, stubborn defiance against the entropy of the shelf. The fire in the hearth is reduced to a single glowing coal, and the nomad wraps himself in his heavy robe of wool and skin. The night is absolute,
a weight of cold and stars that presses down upon the yak hair membrane. But inside, the heart continues its rhythmic, increased workload, and the internal fire is maintained. Tomorrow, the ice will be hacked, the salt will be shoveled, and the lipid fortification will begin again. For now, there is only the silence of the shelf and the steady, quiet breathing of a people who have mastered the stratosphere. The Nyayin Contangler is a graveyard and a sanctuary, a tectonic pedestal where the ancient ocean has become a desert of light, and where life burns brightest in the heart of the saline void. The ancient Tethys lives on in the blood and the salt of the nomad, a prehistoric memory kept alive by the steady, rhythmic pulse of a heart that refuses to succumb to the desiccation of the void. This is the reflection in the white mirror of the salt lake, that we are only as strong as the conditions we can endure. The modern cult of comfort is a fragile shield that will eventually shatter against the reality of the planet. When that time comes, the knowledge of the drokpa will be the only currency that matters.
They are the survivors of the future, living in the past, a people whose existence is a bridge between the primordial origin and the ultimate limit of the species. On the high frontier of Tibet, the fire is still lit, the incense still rises, and the human spirit still burns. A small, defiant signal from the roof of the world. In the vertical silence of the Himalayas, where the air is a luxury and the cold is a predator, the drokpa remain, the keepers of the honest life, stealing enough heat from the void to persist at the edge of the absolute zero. Life persists as a pure, unadorned flame, burning brightest where the air is thinnest and the light is most lethal.